another group, actually a group of churches that came into existence as a reaction to colonialism. And you have them in South America, you have them in Africa, you have them in Asia. And of course we can look at all of them, but that's just plainly impossible. Just look at one group, the people in Africa, and I will take 3 out of I don't know how many, but at least hundreds of cultic Christian groups are there. Not all of them are completely out of touch with reality, but some are. And the problem is that it's very difficult for a Western to understand the feelings of someone who lived under colonial rule, as it is very difficult for a white person to understand what exactly happened to black people in the United States or now and what happened before. So it's something we can touch on, but we hardly understand it. By the way, the month of February is what is called Black Awareness Month. So in different places you will find problems being mentioned, problems you never heard of. I mean, as white people, we never heard of it. And so now they are raising their ideas. So that as a background, let us look at some sects in Africa. Let me read you a statement from the church. I'm not seeing the name of it, unless the name itself is Kimbanguism, an African understanding of the Bible. Let's look at it. For them, or from them, black race, you must know that you were only the dregs of mankind. Africa, oh Africa, all riches are yours. You black person, God loved you from the beginning. Black is the skin God had chosen in this world. This literally, biblically sounding calls to the black race comes from a hymn, which are one of the sacred theological sources of Kimbanguism. An African initiated church born in 1920 from the preaching and the healing campaign conducted by Simon Kimbangu, a Congolese Baptist catechist in reaction to colonial situation in Belgian Congo. He is just one, and when I pick this church, it's because the sheer numbers he has in Congo itself. We are talking about at least 5 million Congolese being part of that church. So it's a major player inside. So you do not only have the Catholics and the Protestants, but you also have a group of African bred churches. They came out of Africa themselves. They have a mixture of some African religion mixed with Christianity. Sometimes that's clear, sometimes that is not that clear. Some of the theology is just a reactionary theology against what the white people brought. To understand, it's necessary to situate not only in the history of the territory it was born in, which is known as the Kingdom of Congo, but also the backdrop of traditional African religions, which reflect a coherent worldview. So let's look at the church as such when you look at what they believe. So why are they a church? First of all, they have what we call the Bible. And how did they get the Bible? Well, they get the Bible from white people who came there, studied the language, translated the Bible in that language, gave the Bible to the people, and then the people started to read and to apply the things they were reading in the Bible. So there's nothing negative about it in itself, except of course when there is no specific leadership saying when you read the Bible, you have to think about certain things. For example, it's another culture, it's another language, it's another time. And then you have to have the application being given to the people at that time. And then, is there a theology coming out? And if there's a theology coming out, so what do you do with the theology? So the practical application for today, what do we do with the text? If you don't teach them that way, they will pick up things and say, this is what we believe. Once they set a whole set of beliefs, it's difficult to go back. So, Mr. Kimbangu, he comes from an area which is close to the seaside. You know, Congo is a big country and has a small line to the seaside. That is the Congo River, and the main city in that area is Matadi. And so he, Kimbangu, was born in that area. That's the area of what we call the Kikongo. So the Kikongo people are Congo people, and giving the name to the river and even to the country. Actually, there are two countries called Congo. So on both sides of the Congo River, you have two Congos. And so the Kikongo living in the two Congos, but also in neighboring countries, both to the north and to the south. So that's where it comes from. So you have to think about it, okay? So we are talking about a kind of an African nation being cut into four pieces. So their colonial rulers are different in the north and in the south. In the middle is someone else. So it's very complicated for them. But that's what happened to them. So that's why they reacted so strongly. So Kimbangu, he founded a church of now 5 million people. And the first thing, so you can actually say the founding act was not a theological issue. No, the founding act was what they say, it was an act of healing. So through the healing, he became a healer. Although that was not specifically known in the Baptist churches at that time. But that is what happened to him. So he laid his hand on someone, and that someone was healed. Out of the healing ministry came a prophetic ministry. So when you bring them together, you hear again healing and prophecies. And that is what's happening there. That's what's happening in many other places today. So Simon Kimbangu, who believed to have the power of resurrecting the dead and healing the sick, also gave his followers a religious message. That was a message of challenging colonialism with the promise that they would see a social change, a turnover of the spiritual order in which the established patterns of the domination would be reversed. So he was actually saying that in his lifetime, the people would become independent, would become free from the white colonial power. Of course, you can say that's fine and that's good and that sounds good, but it's it's their own idea of the utopia. It's their own idea of the millennium. It's their idea of, they were hoping for a return to what they had in the past, and it never came to be. Of course, in 1960, they finally got independent, and, well, even today, it's one of the poorest countries in the world. Although they are so rich, according to the material available, but they are so poor when you see the distribution of wealth. So people can find diamonds, which are very expensive, but even if they find diamonds themselves, they have to give it to their bosses, and the bosses will make money, and they will be poor. So although that is what is happening, so what he promised was kind of true, but not completely true. Anyway, we've seen it now that these people, they were building on they were building first on the Bible. They were building on the white ethnicity, actually ethnocentric idea of the white people, with the pretensions to universalism. And it was born, universalism was born in this. So building on the Bible, people were looked at, or the black people were looked at as uncivilized, and so they were Christianized. But they had the same Bible, they had a different culture, and so the culture came as the black culture became a resistance against the white supremacists. You can also say that is a counter-culturalization system is in place here, and they try to overcome what was wrong, or what was done wrong to them and their forefathers. Out of that came the idea of independence, not just independence from the white people in the West, but also independent as a church. So they were now claiming independence from the explanations and interpretation of the white people. And in many cases that's a good thing, because they were ruled by a Catholic nation, and 70% of the Congolese still today are Catholic. So it's understandable that they would say no to that. But they would say no to specific biblical issues. That's kind of difficult to understand for us. Anyway, it happened. The true of the problems and the difficulties from the colonial powers, and not only colonial powers as such, but also the ecclesiastical colonial powers. Okay, another group is called the Celestial Church of Christ. And of course you hear already CCC. It's a system, it's a real church. They were starting, and it all started right after the Second World War in Benin. And you may say, what has to do with the Second World War? Well, a lot of Africans fought in the war in Europe, and after the war they went back. And so there was a whole range of people, they went through the trauma of the problems in war, and then they tried to find a solution for themselves. So one of them was a man called Oshofa. And Oshofa started in 47 a church or a meeting place in Porto Nova in Benin. What is now called Benin. At that time it had this different name. But anyway, so again, when you look at it, you see what is happening. Again, you have divine revelation being at the beginning, at the foundation of his ministry. And again, you have the healing ministry. So it's very clear that in Africa, healing ministry is absolutely important. And divine, in prophecy, that's how they look at it, they find that very important. Although we know that biblically spoken prophecy has ended, according to Revelations 22, and healing, of course, that's kind of a difficult thing to exactly pinpoint where and what. What we know is that God is able to heal people, and yes, many times he uses other people about healing. You can find that specifically in the book of James, in the 5th chapter. But remember, the 5th chapter of James is written to the church, inside a group, inside a church. Someone who is sick calls the elders of the church. That is not the elders of the church calling the people together for a healing ministry. That's just the opposite. That's just you turn the world upside down. That's what they do. But anyway, so that's what the Bible is teaching, and that's the difference with the churches. The movement of the Celestial Church of Christ is as being spreading out to different countries. Finally, it reached what is now called Nigeria. At that time, it was all under English rule, and what is now called Nigeria. So they were planting a church in the then capital city of Nigeria, was Lagos. They had the idea of, we are the church as God wanted the church to be. So they claimed that the New Jerusalem would be somewhere in Nigeria. So they specifically pinpointed one place, and they had chosen a city called Imeko. Somewhere again in Nigeria, not far away from Lagos. So we have seen that they have a prophetic background, a healing ministry background, a specific place for the end times. So everything was there. And then what happened was that many of the people of the membership of the church, they went abroad. They went to England, they went to Europe, they went to America, and so they took with them the idea of their churches. So now you have the CCC in Belgium, you have the CCC in France, in Germany, in England, in all over the places, and that was something the founder was looking for. He had an idea of an international ministry, and that is what eventually happened. So the church name came into existence because of a claim they found in Deuteronomy 26 verse 15. Look down from the holy habitation from heaven and bless thy people Israel and the land which thou hast given us, as thou didst swear to our father, a land flowing with milk and honey. So they claim it and they just say, well, it was celestial. So and now we have a name for our church. And of course you have these manifestations of they said it was the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. Difficult to say whether it's or not. That is impossible to look back. But out of it came again a system of saying what the people could do. So there were specific, you can almost say, strict rules. And one of the strict rules is the fact that they do not eat pork, according to, again, the Old Testament. But they also forbid tobacco, alcohol. When they are in church, they should not wear shoes, because it's what they call the holy place. When you can only enter the church building if you are clean. Sounds like what we know about the Old Testament rules of the temple and of the some of the synagogues. But they even go further. They're saying you cannot wear shoes, but you have to wear a certain dress. And then they have a limitation on it. Okay, they say, for example, women with menstruating women are not welcome in our churches. Women who had a child delivered, they have to wait at least a week or 10 days. So it is a mixture of biblical Old Testamentical rules, a mixture with New Testament, and some ideas from behind. When I say behind, I mean the African culture. When they speak about churches, they would use the word temple, by the way. So they would say the temple should face eastwards. I don't know where that comes from, but anyway, you have this specific thing. So even when they want to have a building in Europe, they have to look for a building that faces east. And then they have a lot of candles inside the buildings. They also have the seven candle as what we have in the Old Testament, and they link it with the seven spirits of Jehovah. That's what they say, according to Revelations 4 verse 5. So the other thing is that when you have a meeting place, you have separate seatings for the women and separate seatings for men. Another church or another cult that is very close to that one is what is called the cherubim and seraphim. It's the official name is the Eternal Order, the cherubim and seraphim. In short, ESOX, but anyway, they are known as cherubim and seraphim. It's very easy to find them because they wear white clothes and they are going around on Sunday mornings, walking to the villages, walking to the cities in Nigeria, and they will sing. And for them, singing is kind of evangelism. So they try to bring in people when they go to church. They walk through the village to their meeting place, and then they will have a meeting, and other people are, when they are willing, they can come in. The church founder, his name was Moses. Okay, well, that's probably a biblical name. The strange thing about at the level of Africans is that they have their own names, their own African names, and many of them have a chosen name. So, for example, I know a Nigerian, and his name is Man, M-A-N. He chose the name Man, so he used the name Man. So he's known by the authorities in England by the name Man, although that's absolutely not his name. But that's what they do. I have friends in Nigeria, and they're called Timothy. And when you look at it and say, so where's that on your passport? That's not on my passport, that's the name I chose to use. I know someone who is called Faith, also a Nigerian. Her name is absolutely not Faith, but yeah, that's the name she chose. So when you say his name was Moses, most probably he chose that name to go by. But when you look at the name, his real name or family name or second name or whatever you can call it, because that's always very difficult to find out. But his name is Orimolade, and Orimolade is a typical Yoruba name, and that means that he's from the south, the southwest of Nigeria. Again, he started the church, but let me tell you a little bit about the story before he was born. I like this story. So when his mother was pregnant, she had to go and cut some wood for a fire to prepare food. And of course, when she was pregnant, she had a problem with the weight of the wood. And so suddenly she heard a voice saying how she had to handle this. And she looked around and she couldn't find someone. And then the voice said, I'm in your belly. I'm the baby. I'm telling you what to do. So she was amazed by that. And of course the father was amazed by the story afterwards. But at that time, when she delivered, the baby immediately stood up on his 2 feet. And the nurse, the midwife, was trying to help the baby. And she pushed the baby down. And so the baby probably broke both his legs. And he was crippled for the rest of his life. So that's the story. I'm not saying anything is true about it. I'm just saying that is the story here. The father was so embarrassed by all this that he asked his wife to leave. And so she left. But then later on, Orimola, let us say it that way, chose to send a message to his father that he had to go to a mountain, and that mountain today is known as Calvary. Of course, we remember Calvary in the Bible as being the place where Jesus died. And his father had to ask forgiveness, which he did, and eventually his father died, and he was, and that's specifically, okay, he was buried honorably. That would not even come in mind for a Westerner to say. but for them that is important. When the boy, Rimolade, one day he was singing in church. The church was totally empty, while one of the leaders of that church heard voices in the church. He thought it was a choir singing. So strong was the voice. But the boy was only 5 years old. When the elder entered, he was amazed. And he decided to give Orimolade the chance to give spiritual teaching by the singing. And so that's how this idea started. So he said that he was called to preach the gospel, and that's what he did. And heal the sick. And again, that's what he did. He decided to pray because he had a lot of opposition. People were looking down to him because he was crippled. And so there was a problem in the village, and there was an earthquake, and through him the earthquake was undone, and so the people of the village accepted him even with his disability. From that moment on, he moved to other places and preached the gospel in different places. Important for the church is that the book of Revelation is taken in a certain way. So it is not specifically literally or specifically spiritually. It has some certain meanings which are difficult to define. So they are using elements that being said or being used in the book of Revelation, like for example the candles. Remember, in the first chapters of Revelation, you have they speak about the candles and incense, something that was given to Jesus' parents at his birth, and so they take up all these things and say, okay, this is what we like to do. So they have the candles, the incense. By the way, that's what they claim are chasing away the evil spirits. And yeah, you must understand the mindset before you understand why they are saying a thing like that. One day I was in a church in Nigeria, in the southeast of Nigeria, and there was a driver, and he got a seizure. So he fell. He started foaming at the mouth, and so a number of people came to him and said, "You have to confess sin. You have to confess your sin. You have to confess your sin." And so the man was like, he didn't know what was happening, and he still had to confess sin. And while he was doing that, someone else, one of the ladies, took a broom. She opened the door, literally opened the door, and with the broom she went inside the room, was sweeping out. And I asked her, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm sweeping out the demons." For us, it's totally unbelievable almost. It's unimaginable. But that is how real for them the idea of demons is. So be careful when we speak about it, or we do not judge them. They also use what they called consecrated oil. Fasting is an important issue. They say that fasting increases the spiritual strength. And that is true. Certainly that is true. When you fast for the right reasons and with the inside the right attitude, you're doing a good thing. And when you put more time of prayer, of course you get more results. Again, we have to be very careful when you see those people, because they have many of them still use what we call charms. And yeah, giving things a magical nature. They don't have to have it, but that's how they perceive it. So there is a difficulty there anyway. The church has a number of special holidays. For example, the holiday of the Holy Michael, the angel we are talking about, or the Holy Gabriel. Of course, again, the angel. That's the third, let's see, that's the third Thursday in August. And then they have the anniversary of the Seraphim Band. It's things that are completely unknown to us in evangelical circles. But they also have, for example, a day of prayer for Jerusalem. A day of prayer for peace in Jerusalem, actually. They have what they call love feasts. Is when the whole church comes together and the church is providing food and drinks for the members. That also comes from the Old Testament, from the temple time. On Sunday they have their meetings. On Monday they have a prayer meeting. On Tuesday they have a Bible study class. On Wednesday they have a women's prayer meeting. On Thursday they have what they call the midweek full service. On Friday, I don't know. On Saturday they have another meeting. So except for Friday, I see every day they have meetings. Somebody was telling about the fact that their church had the same thing. They had meetings every day, and the other one asked, "Do you have time to mend your socks?" And I think that gives you a good idea. We need to find a balance between them, but seemingly other people in other churches, they think differently about it. So we talked about cults and sects, and sects, as we talked, was a small group that came out of a bigger group and then separated itself and started a new organization. Cult is a deviation of original Christianity. In that sense, Roman Catholicism is also a cult. But in fact, it started as a sect. And remember, we talked about the word sect being used in the New Testament several times in the book of Acts. And they spoke about the sect of the Nazarene, which was Jesus. So the word itself is not positive or negative. The word itself means it's a cutoff. Cult, in this sense, is kind of more negative. It is. It's not as you cannot perceive it as something good. A cult is close to the other word occult, which we used before, and it has to do with things you do in a certain way, which are not supposed to be done that way. Of course, who is going to judge? When we look at a number of churches, they all have their own traditions and their own things they do. For example, when you go to an Orthodox church, you hardly find any chairs there. You have to stand. And some of their meetings are lasting for 2 and 3 hours. I heard about one that lasted for 5 hours. So I don't know whether I would go to that church or maybe take my camping chair with me and at least be able to sit down. But anyway, it's just a way of doing things. Has nothing to do theologically, has nothing to do with the buildings itself. It just has to do with the available space. You can have many more people standing than have people sitting. And in this time and age where we have the COVID regulations, of course that is a limitation because you can only seat, every person has, what is it, 10 square meter or something, and you need to have the distance between two people would be 1.5 meters or in some cases 2 meters. Like I said, that has nothing to do with theology, it has nothing to do with what the people believe, it has only to do with how to organize your local place of worship. That is something that is for different churches, different places, different rules. But when you go to other groups like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, for example, when you go to the Mormon church, they have a system in place, not all, of course, not all over the world, but they have a system in place in Utah that everyone in Utah can be at a meeting place or a meeting hall in 10 minutes time. That is walking distance. We have, in Belgium, we have a similar thing that has nothing to do with the walking place, but the implanting of the different churches was done in the sense that you need to hear the other church bells. If you stop hearing it, you're too far. So when the church bells are ringing, when they would be ringing in every church, the whole of Belgium would hear, or at least the places where people live, would hear those bells going. And so that is a way of looking at it. So that is a way of working towards church planting. So they would plant a church where there is no church when you cannot hear the bell. The Roman Catholic Church, they have a different way of looking at church planting. When evangelicals or Protestants, when they have a group of, say, 25, 30 people together, they will call that a church, and they will try to find a meeting place, and they will start services. And that's what the evangelicals would call church planting. The Roman Catholic Church, they have a slightly different idea about it. So, like I said before, hearing the bell, if you can't hear the bell, you can plant a church there. And how do they plant churches? Well, I will give you an example. There is a church in Antwerp called the Cathedral, that's Our Lady's Cathedral. It was started in the 15th century, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, not in the 15th century, and it finished in the 16th century. It took them 120 years to build one building. When you look at evangelicals over a time of 120 years, you would have at least 3 or 4, maybe some 5 or 6 churches instead of one. The group started, the group grew, group diminished, they finished. They started all over again, they grew, they diminished, they finished. They started over again, and you know, and over a period of 120 years, you probably would have 5, 6 of different churches being planted. So what's what they call the Roman Catholics, like I said, they have the other idea. And to understand the difference, we speak about church planting and we speak about the cathedral church planting. So when you build a cathedral not just for one generation or for 2 generations, you build a church for almost like eternity. And that's why the church buildings of the Roman Catholic churches are always, the churches, not the chapels, the churches are always in stone. They're always strongholds. They're always built to last. They're always big, with a high steeple, so everyone can see them. Because that is part of the Roman Catholic system. So they would have not only churches and cathedrals, but they will also have church schools and hospitals. Because they say, we are catering for the whole person. Not just for the people on Sunday morning or Saturday evening. No, we are catering for the whole people. So they have to go to school. So you can have almost in any village in the whole of Belgium, you will have a kindergarten from the Catholics, a preschool from the Catholics, a primary school from the Catholics, a secondary school from the Catholics, and the main places, the main cities all over Belgium have universities, and the majority of the universities are from the Catholics. So your education from 2.5 years to 24 years old, you can go to Catholic churches, or Catholic schools. That's their way of indoctrinating you. So they will not have, not anymore anyway, they will not force you to go to Mass, which by the way we usually call Mess, but anyway, they call it Mass. So to go to Mass every Sunday, they will not do that. But they will influence you. For example, they would have a possibility to study what is called political science. Although, of course, the Roman Catholic in itself has no... there is a political party, but they are not a party in itself. They don't supposed to have a specific preference for one of the parties. But when they start teaching political science, it's in the background. What you hear is a Jesuit speaking. Speaking about the Jesuit, I like that. You know the Pope today, he's a Jesuit. Before he was a Pope, he swore allegiance, listen to this, he swore allegiance to the general of the Jesuit order. So the real ruler of the Roman Catholic Church today is not the Pope, because whatever he decides, he has to go to the Jesuit general to ask him permission to do certain things. So he is the real ruler of the Church. So he holds everything in his hand. So you see, Roman Catholicism, you cannot just speak about Roman Catholicism as a church, because it's a system. It's a way of living. It's a way of studying. It's a way of doing things. Roman Catholicism is not just a church. It is a system. It is a way of living. And it's a way of perceiving. That is so because, for example, in countries like Belgium or Poland or Austria, they have everything. They can shut down the government and still run the country because of what they have and the power they have. The power is not the specific power in the biblical sense, but the economic and the societal power. They can run everything by their own. They have their own doctors, their own hospitals, their own schools, their own churches, their own buildings, their own offices, their own shops, whatever, they have it. So it is more than just a church. So when we talk about a church, we always think about what the people are doing and what the people are teaching or learning. And what they are doing in Roman Catholic sense is totally different from what they believe. They can actually contradict themselves in what they believe and what they do. It's like a judge was saying, listen to my words, don't look at or don't watch me doing things. So that is a totally different approach of what evangelicals or Protestants have. Because for Protestants, a belief, a faith, is a personal thing. For Roman Catholics, it is a shared thing. It is a shared belief. And then, when you share your belief, it is not a very specific one. There are certain specifics, but in itself, what you personally believe is less important than what the church as a whole. So it's getting more and more complicated. When you look back into time, and you go back to the Roman Catholic Church, let's say as many perceive it, that is that the church, the Roman Catholics themselves, they believe and they claim they are the only and real one church started by Jesus Christ himself, and from that moment on, they have a whole line of people being in leadership in the church. So how do you go back and listen to them and then try to understand what they are saying? For example, they will say the church in Rome is founded by Peter and Paul. Let me be clear on this. Peter and Paul? Absolutely, certainly not. There is no recollection. Let this be understand to you. There's no historical proof of any recollection that Peter was ever in Rome. It is only something some people said, but it was not being accepted. And by the way, let's look at it. Let's look at the biblical proof of what I'm saying. Paul wrote to the church in Rome. And he wrote to the church where, according to Roman Catholic belief, Peter was the bishop. The funny thing is, or the strange thing is, that Paul not even mentions the name of Peter in the book of Romans. Although Peter should be there. It was not dead at that time. Peter lived. So why did Paul not mention the name of Peter? Well, very simple. He wasn't there. That's how simple it is. Peter was not in Rome. So when Paul wrote to the Romans, he was not in Rome. He had never been in Rome. So if he was not in Rome, so who founded the church in Rome? Well, let's go to it. Because the Bible gives us a very clear clue about who founded the church in Rome. You can find that in the book of Acts. And you can read it. Acts 2. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like a blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came and rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues, as the Spirit enabled them. Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under the heaven. When they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each heard them in their own language. Utterly amazed, they asked, "Aren't they all who are speaking Galileans, then how is it that each of us hears them in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Parthia, Pamphylia, Egypt, parts of Libya, near Cyrene, visit from Rome. Both Jews and converts to Judaism. And let's not go on. Okay? In the same chapter, we have the sermon of Peter, and then we have the reaction of the people. And the reaction of the people was, they asked what to do, and Peter answered. So listen to it. In verse 40 of Acts 2. With many other words he warned them and pleaded with them, save yourself from this corrupt generation. He's talking about the Jewish nation, the corrupt generation. Those who accepted this message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. So now you know where the church started. The church of Rome started in Jerusalem. People of Rome were in Jerusalem at that time. When they went back, they settled down, and of course they were Jews, and they were trying to go to the synagogue and speak about Jesus, which they could do 1 or 2 times, and then the synagogue kicked them out. And so they set up another place to meet. And they had a separate church building, a place where they met, and that's the start of the Roman church. Has nothing to do with Peter. It's nothing to do with Paul, because they were not even there. And they were not to be there for the next 30 years. So why does the church, the Roman Catholic Church, claims that Peter was the founder of the church? This, like I said, not even absolute truth. There's no truth at all of Peter being in Rome. Anyway, we have a number of people speaking about it. Okay. For example, you have Clement of Rome, who ministered in Rome. Let me see, and that is that's even the 1st century. And so then you have Ignatius of Antioch, that is also the 1st century, and then you have Irenaeus of Lyon, which is the 2nd century. And they said that Peter was in Rome, serving as the first bishop. So we have to go back to find out who they were. Who was Clement, and where did Clement get his information from? Clement get his information in Rome. But there was no information to get. So they fabricated information about Peter being there. And why did they do that? Well, there was a shift going on. And the first shift was going on was from Jerusalem, where the church was founded. And then there came problems. Remember, James died. And then the church was spread out. It was spread out to different places. And one of the places they went to was Antioch. And seemingly a lot of people went there. And so they started a meeting there. And that church was evangelizing and starting to grow, even so fast that it was soon bigger than the church in Jerusalem. And so and then you have the story about in the 15th chapter of the book of Acts about the difficulty between Antioch and Jerusalem, and how Peter eventually caved in with his ideas and gave the facts away, and just giving the Gentiles the same rights as the Jews.